Okay, I'll keep going. I want to really start in the port of Lyme Regis, down on the south coast. On June the 11th that year, 3 small ships anchored offshore. They weren't flying any flags, so nobody really knew what they were. And the first person to approach them was a fisherman from Charmouth, a guy by the name of Samuel Robbins, and he was keen to try and sell them some of his catch. This initiative ended up costing him his life. Later that year, he was executed for aiding rebels, because on board that ship was the Duke of Monmouth, and his sole objective in coming to England was to overthrow the king. It's all right, I'm having trouble with my PowerPoint. There we go. 3 small ships off the coast at Lyme Regis. A boatload of armed men landed from the small flotilla, and it was fairly soon evident that they were of some importance, that in fact the expected rebellion was now underway. The local customs officer quickly set off to London to warn the authorities, taking something like 30 hours to cover the 155 miles. So very soon the king and his advisors were in the know and therefore able to act quickly and decisively. And that's the king. That was the king at the time, James II. You probably all knew that anyway. He's one of those people in history who's had a remarkably bad press. Some of it fair, some of it unfair. In that year, 1685, his predecessor, his brother, Charles II, had died, leaving no legitimate children. But he had left 12 illegitimate children. As a result, the crown passed to his younger brother, who was James, and it was a totally legitimate transition, uncontested, everybody accepted it. James himself had actually had quite an interesting military career, that during the Commonwealth, when Oliver Cromwell was ruling the country, James had fought on the continent for particularly France, but also for Spain. He'd been an admiral in the navy of his brother Charles, and by all accounts, quite successful in his military careers. As Lord High Admiral, he led the fleet successfully in the wars against the Dutch. And as a total aside, of course, it's actually this guy who New York is named after when he was Duke of York. And less well known is that the state capital in New York, Albany, is also named after him, insofar as the Duke of Albany was his Scottish title. But anyway, that's got nothing to do with the subject in hand. Pertinent to events currently, he was also responsible for the capture of several forts off the African coast, which laid the foundations for the English slave trade that obviously developed subsequently. It's one of the great truths of history that is always written by the winners. And as I say, I think subsequent generations have not been very kind to James II. It's worth emphasising that in his youth he was popular, and he was seen to be something of a womanizer, which isn't exactly how history remembers him. When he came to the throne, I think it's probably fair to say he was one of those people who had not developed well, hadn't aged well, that he was fairly stuck in his ways, not prepared to compromise, still holding ideas, Stuart ideas of absolute kingship. And he hadn't really learned much wisdom as he got older. And the one area where he was totally unbending, which was going to prove to be his downfall, was the subject of his Roman Catholicism.
Just on here, it comes up from here.
He was a confirmed Catholic, and remember, of course, that religion was far more important to people in those days than it is today. Religion was more closely involved with politics. Catholicism was very much in people's minds associated with absolute rule, as Louis XIV of France showed. And it was also the basis of a lot of local government. A lot of local government was based around the church.
Interesting.
The threat to his reign came from his nephew, the Duke of Monmouth, who, as I've already indicated, was an illegitimate son of Charles II. Now, I say illegitimate, I mean, some people claimed that there was a secret marriage between Charles and his mother, but it does sound pretty far-fetched. Again, Monmouth had had a moderately successful military career on the continent. He'd served under him during the Second Dutch War, so he's been a Navy man as well. But he was also very popular with the people he met. He'd got the common touch. He, knew how to wow a crowd. So it was James, Duke of Monmouth, who had sailed from Holland and was now raising his rebellion after landing at Lyme Regis. This was a Protestant plot against the Roman Catholic monarch, and the plan was for simultaneous risings in Scotland and in England. And the hope was that the various parts of the country would rise up against James II, particularly, as I said, Scotland, Cheshire, the West Country, and London, all highly Protestant parts of the United Kingdom. Our part of the world had been a centre of Protestantism during the English Civil War, and dissenting roots did run deep here. In 1680, the Duke of Monmouth had toured the West Country and proved to be very popular. He got crowds wherever he went.
Nice place, isn't he?
So much rested on the arrival of this small, ill-equipped, underfunded invasion at Lyme Regis, led by this guy, accompanied by just 80, and I'll repeat that number, 80 supporters. There's another picture of him, contemporary picture of the Duke of Monmouth, this time in a battle scene, when he was fighting on the continent. This is Lyme Regis as it is today, the aptly named Monmouth Beach where he first landed. It's worthwhile just thinking, though, why he chose to land in the West. As I've already said, the West was, to a degree, a leftover from the English Civil War in terms of the attitudes that still held. And I think it's again worth pointing out that the English Civil War only really ended in 1651 with the Battle of Worcester. So we're only talking about 34, 35 years later. So a lot of people, a lot of men who had fought during the English Civil War were still alive. They were still talking in their communities. And of course, it was an era when people respected the wisdom of age far more than we do today.